Looks like Mark's having problems.
Not just Mark. I guess we all are. Okay. You want to start? Dan's here too.
I think it's already live right now.
It is. It's live.
It's just beamed up.
Live from New York. It's Friday morning.
It's Friday morning. In some places, Friday night in other places.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Yeah, I'm speaking to you from the great municipality of Cedar Hills, Utah.
It's all problematic. I guess what he's trying to do is what the news is about today.
There's an expression, Rahm Emanuel said that a crisis is a horrible thing to waste. Did the Republicans throw away a good chance to put stuff in a bill when they just passed the budget?
No, because the process moves slow. And they still haven't passed the 2024 budget. See,
forget about that.
I don't know why
they raised the debt bill.
I don't know why they just lie to the American public and not tell the truth. It's
a great question.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's either misrepresentation, lies, etc. Okay, the 2023 budget's already been passed. Now, it was passed by, obviously, a Democratic Congress with a Democratic president. That's what they're whining about. The 2024 budget has not been passed. That is where, if they want to make adjustments, they can do so. Then there was all this crying saying, well, Ted Budd here, who's horrible. Okay, now I'm for Tillerson against Budd. He could have said, well, he should have voted for this. And then you can go back and say, well, we're going to create a new amendment to get rid of all this COVID spending that we shouldn't spend. So there were things that could be done, but they just, frankly, they just didn't do it. In other words, what they were doing was they were putting all Americans, actually the whole country, on a potential road to financial hell, okay, for no reason. And that's what gets me, is that, are we supposed to be stupid enough to buy into this stuff? And so voting for it was the correct decision. In other words, if you put this into chat box GDT, it'll say voting for it is correct. Some of the other measures that they're against, which are probably correct because the budget is out of control, they can make adjustments to now, if they have the cojones to do it. Okay?
Nick,
yeah.
You're saying voting for it was the correct thing to do. Would you still say that if they put in other things also that you disagreed with, that you just blindly vote for it?
It doesn't matter, okay? Because the real problem is that they created a phony crisis that didn't have to exist in Congress.
Agreed.
Okay, so now that you created the Congress, got to solve it. And there's a crisis going on right now. David Walker, and we've been yelling it about for years, and they're not addressing it. Medicare goes bankrupt. Medicare goes bankrupt this decade.
In
the next 5 years. Okay, they can do something about it right now. They can have hearings on it. They can make adjustments right now. Why aren't they doing it, Lee? Tell me why. You know why? Because Congress likes to manage by crisis. They're waiting to a crisis, and then they're going to bully pulp everybody down rather than deal with it now. Social Security goes bankrupt next decade.
Same.
They could deal with it now, but they want to manage by crisis and throw in abortion bills, and student debt, and all this other garbage. It is just an extreme. It's a great example of a Harvard Business School.
But speaking of business school, Nick, isn't it my understanding that there is a entire philosophy that exists in business and everything that is basically like running things by crisis management? Because
Well, yeah, I actually went to study in MBA school. Now I was in the MBA program at 19, so I went to the University of South Florida.
right,
At the MBA school, they actually teach you management by objectives, management by crisis.
right.
I mean, it's kind of like doesn't mean anything to you when you're in school until you go to work and you actually see it. They manage by crisis, not by objectives. This is what David Walker's been saying.
Yeah.
What they need to do is have a 5-year plan, have a 10-year plan. China does it. Notice their GDP is 7 to 8%. We have zero plan. And it's the responsibility of both parties and the American public and the American media to hold them accountable. Yes,
here's a question though. Is it that they're managing by crisis, or is it that they're trying to focus on that driving people through the same political games that we play all the time? Because the appropriations process isn't sexy, it isn't scary, it's just an actual normal process that Congress does. If you wait till the bill is due to start complaining about all the things you spent money on and then complain the whole time, is that better politically?
Yes.
Because it's not better business wise than anything else, but it seems like they're not really utilizing the whole by crisis per se, but doing it for politics.
It's politically. What it is how we're going to, quote, sell my base on what I'm doing, whatever it might be. And it goes on by both parties.
Yeah.
One base goes, oh, we're going to eliminate student debt. Okay. And they're going to keep selling their base that deal without ever explaining the downside consequences to it. There's two sides to every argument. And then one party goes, oh, we're going to cut all the spending. And the thing is, I agree, we should cut spending, but they don't never say a solution such as we're now going to raise taxes, because that would be political suicide. And there's only two ways you're going to be able to balance this budget: raise taxes, cut spending, or both. There's no other way. It's not like money's going to magically appear, which they've been doing for years, and it's called debt.
Nick,
I mean, it's just
Nick, what's the logic in raising the debt limit for a 2-year period? Where did they pull 2 years from?
Well. First of all, it's $4 trillion, which is a lot of money. Trust me, $4 trillion.
I'm talking about the time limit, not the amount.
But if you look at it, it actually is $2 trillion over 2 years. Let's put it that way, Lee. And then it's less than 10% of our current debt. So they're raising the debt limit by basically the interest that we're going to be paying on the debt. Because the other solution is you got to get interest rates down. This is another.
I get all that, but why 2 years? Why not 3 years? Why not 1 year?
Hold on a second, Nick, and Lee. The reason that they said that they did.
We're trying to get 100 cats to agree which way to go.
No, hold on a second.
Okay.
They said that there was a reasoning behind what they did, and it actually makes sense from a political standpoint, because they said that if you do it in the 2-year limit or a 2-year period, then that makes it a non-issue for the 2024 election. So
maybe it should be an issue for the election.
Huh?
Well,
Maybe it should be an issue for the election.
Lee, I have to disagree because
the finance of the American government should
I'm
be.
sorry, I can't hear too.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay,
I was
sorry.
just going to say, and I'll probably, because Nick and I agree, I think, on this point, is that it shouldn't be an issue politically. It should not be a political football. The appropriations process is the correct process for debating, spending, and everything else. The debt limit is when the bill is due. We just got to pay the bill. And so we cannot sit there and wait until the end of the time.
I get that. If it's only about we just got to pay the bill, why do we care then about the debt? Just as long as our budgets are approved, the debt should be irrelevant. We should have no ceiling because it's all been approved.
The problem, the reason we have to look at the debt is and also David Walker's correct on this. They call it the debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio.
No, I get all that, Nick.
What?
But if it's all we're talking about, everything's been approved anyways. We just have to pay the bill when it comes in.
Yeah, right.
Then we've already approved it. What are we talking about?
That was on the table this week. This debt problem should be on the table every week, not just this week. It should be highlighted.
That's
in
a
the media.
budgetary problem, you're saying.
Because the real problem is it affects the financial health of all Americans.
I agree with you.
Right? So it should be discussed this week as well.
So the problem is the debt has become a political football when we have to pay the bill. And that's the problem. It's not a fact of we have to worry about the debt or we don't have to worry about the debt and so on and so forth. We have to realize that our political process has bled into our actual governance process. So the debt itself, well, while important and while we need to discuss it and while we need to look at spending and so on and so forth, the problem is that we get to a point where we have to pay the bill and we decide to wait to the last minute and put the credit of the U.S. in jeopardy.
No, I get all that.
That tanks the
But on a personal level, we don't go out and spend on our own knowing one day those bills are going to come in. We don't got the cash. We just won't do the spending.
So the tough part about the analogy dealing with
because actually a lot of people do that, and actually a federal watchdog agency kind of has targeted one of the groups that is part of that and everything. So we can't say that we as individuals don't do that, because there is a lot.
We do, but it's irresponsible.
Because there are a lot of people that are using apps. And I mean, I've even been using the apps as well, like Venmo, Cash App, and PayPal. And one of those federal consumer watchdogs on yesterday is warning consumers not to store money on those apps because those monies are not automatically insured by the government and can be completely lost if one of those companies fails. So that is a case of us as individuals choosing to go to these apps because it is a way to avoid the banks. In some cases, it's a way to not have all the regulations that the banks have sometimes, and there are different other reasons.
Great advice.
Yeah. And I think we're all in agreement that yes, we all have to watch spending and we all have to monitor the debt. But I think the problem is we have to realize right now the debt limit talks. They really aren't talks, and they really aren't true discussions about paying the bill. The discussions have become
100%.
The discussions have become, well, I'm not going to raise the debt limit or even vote for the debt limit unless I get this particular power play. And that's where it shouldn't be. The debt limit, and it shouldn't be about, well, if I don't get this power move, I'm not going to help you out on voting the debt limit up. And that's what, if you take, for instance, the Freedom Caucus is going now after McCarthy and calling everybody else a rhino and so on and so forth, because they voted for the debt limit because they realize that they have to raise the debt limit. But the Freedom Caucus wants more power and using it as a political tool and not really at using it or trying to fight for financial cutbacks or spending limits in the actual appropriations process, which it's supposed to be in. So it's just.
I get all that, but maybe some of them feel in the appropriation process they're ignored. This is their one chance to hold people accountable.
Yeah,
but that's not holding people accountable. That's holding up a process. That's saying, okay, well, we're going to go to jail and we're not going to pay our credit card bill or our restaurant bill. We're all going to jail because you're not letting me get a Sprite.
But Toby, that's across the board, to come back to Lee's point, because
I mean, it happens on both sides.
I did make it yesterday to the event, and definitely Reverend Barber was there. Bernie actually made it through the wonders of telecommunications and all in that space, because ironically he didn't make it to Durham because he had to do the debt ceiling vote, and he had actually said at the end of his speech that he was not going to vote for the debt ceiling for exactly the reasons that Lee just said. He said that there were things in the package as he saw it that he did not approve of, because he was talking about some of the stuff with child care and how they are paid and the overspending on the military, and there were some other things that he felt were social issues that were not getting addressed, and therefore he was not going to vote for the debt ceiling. He made that very clear at the end of his speech and everything.
And I agree. On both sides, holding the debt ceiling, it's a bill.
Well, let me. It was an artificial. It was an artificial problem to begin with. Let me explain why. The Democrats, when they were in power and they passed the budget and did this omnibus bill, could have extended the debt ceiling then. Instead, they knew that this would create an issue for the Republicans, and so they wanted to create a situation for the Republicans. Okay, so now the bottom line is, I think we've got a reasonable compromise, and both parties can take what they deem as a victory lap. But I agree with Lee; it's not a victory lap because it really hasn't solved any problems. Now, so the budgetary process is by its nature a political process. It is that way all the time. No matter whether it's raising the debt limit or whatever, there are certain priorities each of the parties want to promote and that kind of thing, and that costs money. And so that it is all about, I'm glad they were able to compromise and resolve this issue, and nobody got what they wanted really, but it did solve the problem temporarily anyway, to move the football forward. And I think I agree with Lee that the reason the 2-year period was established was to take it off the table for purposes of the presidential election. But I agree with Lee in that it should be an issue, that not the debt ceiling, but the budget is a big issue. Yeah. And the problem is we spend too much money.
Dan, I will say you're incorrect in saying that the Democrats didn't want to take it off the table because they wanted to create a problem for the Republicans. That's not true. The reason they couldn't take it off the table is because you needed votes in the Senate. They did not have the votes in the Senate to do so. So they couldn't take it off the table just because of that. On top of that, yes, again, we all agree the budget is an issue. We all agree that there's spending problems. We may disagree on where that spending is and where that spending isn't. That's where our disagreement comes into play. But the problem, again, is right now, the debt ceiling is a manufactured issue, which we could have avoided because we do realize that there is an appropriations process.
Jacoby,
utilizing the debt ceiling for that is the problem, because we have no alternative. If we don't pay the bill, then we lose our credit rating. The banker gets crushed. So we as a banker fail. So even if, whatever's thrown in there is going to have to be voted on. There's no other recourse for it. And that's the sad part.
Question for you, Jacoby. Do you agree in theory there should be a debt limit, a ceiling? In theory, that we should have one that cannot be changed, period.
I don't think that at this moment, prior years before we became so divided and so partisan and utilizing it as such a political tool, prior years, I would agree. Now, I think that the debt ceiling should not be in the hands of Congress. More so,
who should it be in the hands of?
More so that Janet Yellen and the Treasury and all that department.
Oh, bad idea.
We should abolish it.
That's having the foxes guarding the hen house.
No, even in the Republican-led presidency, that's where it should be, due to the fact of the way the political football is, the debt ceiling. And it's not really the foxes guarding the hen house. The foxes guarding the hen house are right now. The foxes are the ones who are holding up the debt ceiling vote to the last minute.
No,
and knowing that they have an appropriation process.
Toby, it's a Federal Reserve that's an independent corporation that prints the money that we borrow and pay them interest on in order to pay our bills. So that's how it works. You can't give them the power to control the debt ceiling because they are the foxes. They are the predators on the American system.
Are you letting the secret out of the box, the cat, that the Federal Reserve is not a government agency?
We know.
Yeah, that's right. They are. They're an independent agency. They're wealthy bankers that control the financial choices in our country. They're the ones that are raising the interest rates artificially at this time. They're the ones that are causing the pain. And so they're also the ones that are benefiting from the high interest rates. So they're the fox in the hen house and should not be given the power to extend the debt ceiling.
How do you solve the issue that we have with partisan politics and partisan policies that want to default on the debt ceiling.
Who
We're a
wants the default?
republic.
One second, Jacoby. Who wants the default? I've never heard that argument.
No one
So
wanted
Trump-
the default.
Trump
This is
went
a
out and-
republic, and
Trump and the
elected
MAGA
officials
Republicans
have to
went
make
out
those
and
Oh,
said
decisions.
one second, Dan. I'm gonna hear Jacoby.
Okay,
Trump
go ahead.
Trump at his rallies and actually on TV and interviews has pushed for default. MAGA Republicans have pushed for default at their events and on interviews. So they were willing to and wanted to default. Even the ones, and there are some Democrats that were okay with not voting for it. So you had 130 some.
Yeah,
140 some
Jacoby,
that voted
not
for it.
voting for a bill is not the same as wanting a default.
No, but we were at no. So the debt ceiling, had they not
Mhm.
passed the debt ceiling,
Right?
because June 5th is when Janet Yellen and the Fox, as you're calling it, had already stated that we were going to default and run out of money. Had that not passed and had the actual information not come out on the bill, 72 hours, which was what McCarthy had agreed to with the House Republicans, that had to happen. Had that not happened on June 2nd, June
Right.
3rd, then we would default on the loan, which is something Trump advocated for. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who turned around and voted for it, advocated for, and some of the other MAGA Republicans who are out
My
and about.
understanding is, I'm not disagreeing with you, and my understanding is because they think that this bill is worse than defaulting. They're just delaying.
No, so default the default, because we are the world's banker at this
No,
moment.
I get all that.
So if the banker defaults, so having yes, so I disagree with some of the things that are in the bill. I completely disagree with it. But a default, meaning that we can't pay our bills, we sit here and complain about how we don't want China this, we don't want China that. That becomes, now we lose our credit rating. China then begins to swoop in an adversary economically. Other countries start to swoop in, being adversaries economically. We lose our credit rating. The dollar value drops. That means the inflation that we complain about.
No, I get all that. Okay.
So
Jacoby,
that's
so
why
now we have this bill that passed. We didn't default. I have a question for you. The
Yes.
debt that we have, are we ever going to pay it off? Is that possible?
And we have to be realistic.
No.
We're never going to be able to pay off.
So one day we will default.
What?
No, it's deliberate that we have these debts, and it's basically Keynesian economics. I mean, it's done on purpose. The fiat currency is what it is, and the spending is what it is. It's part of the structure of the banking system and how the financing internationally works and the floating of the debt. You know that over 70% of the finance debt in the world is actually gray money, floated in the bond markets in Europe. But it's necessary to have that volume in order to support the debts of governments around the world, and that's kind of the problem. And so the truth is, they'll never pay these debts off, Lee. It's not they never plan to pay the debts off.
I mean,
What do y'all think about what I think Kim is raising, which is this question that I think that all the people who got a PPP loan and did not pay employees with it should have to pay it back and all in that line. So what is y'all thoughts about that? Because that is,
Were those the terms, Mark, when they got it?
that wasn't the terms when they got it. I'm sure they were just.
You can't change the terms once the money's out.
Well, a lot of the PPP loans also, how people are, I think it was yesterday or the day before, we complained about student loan forgiveness. Well, there were PPP loans that were more than the student loans that got forgiven. And nobody complained about the forgiveness on the PPP loans.
Oh, that's not true, Jacoby. Why they forgive them?
Complaining about the student loans.
No, you're saying that the PPP loans. Why were they forgiven? Were there terms that they would be forgiven when they were initially given out if they met certain criteria?
Not that I know of.
Well, I mean, what
So
somebody
they changed it from a loan that had to be repaid to one that did not have to be repaid because of the wins?
Yeah, and the PPP loans are a certain category of expenses that they're permitted to use the funds for, and they had to use it for that funds. It wasn't just employee wages, as Kim is suggesting. There are a number of categories because of the stress that businesses went under with respect to the PPP loans. Now, some of the businesses that took PPP loans is outrageous. Some of the organizations that actually took it. And so, yeah, I agree with Kim. It was corporate.
Dan, if they were eligible, why is that outrageous? Why is it outrageous if they were eligible?
Because of the nature of the way the money was used.
That's not their fault. That's the government's fault then.
Okay, so Lee, some organizations it took millions and millions of dollars of PPP loans during the crisis, and some of them are NGOs and that kind of thing. Whether that decision is right or wrong, I know a company that I'm on the board of that decided not to take the PPP loan. They're considering it and decided that because they didn't really need it to survive, they didn't.
I got that. But the politicians decided that they were eligible. Why can you fault them for choosing to take it?
Well, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Again, it follows back to politics, and that's
everything.
Those were, but Lee is right. Those were the specific qualifications for that loan and loan forgiveness. People knew that going into it, and that's why they were able to do it, whether there was large or small, right? So the student loan is different. They entered into that never anticipating that they wouldn't have to pay it back. They knew they had to pay it back. It becomes an obligation. They should have understood that. I mean, I paid all my student loans back. I think it was $65,000 worth of damn stuff.
What about
and so I mean, give me a refund. Give me
the PPP loans were supposed to be paid back, but then on top of that, they got kicked. They didn't get paid back by some companies. But your argument is the same. If you're saying that this company who paid the PPP loan back, but this company who got forgiveness, how's that?
Well, no. See, Jacoby, there were specific requirements for forgiveness that were given in advance of the PPP loan. You have to meet these certain criteria, and then you will be forgiven. That was the deal in advance. It wasn't that some people had to pay it back and others didn't.
So, for example, like many of the senators who received PPP loans did not fit that criteria.
Right.
But they
should have to pay it back. They should have to pay it back. No, they
didn't pay it back.
They got it. They should have.
I mean, that's my point, is that there are a lot of people who got that PPP loan that didn't fit that criteria, and then on top of that, got it forgiven. So
exactly. That's fraud.
Dan, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, how is that different? Because there's outrage over the student loans, but not outrage over the PPP loans.
Well, I'll tell you why it's different, because those that took the PPP loans under fraudulent circumstances and never paid it back are committing fraud. Right. That's the difference. They should have never taken it. They should have never received it. It's fraudulent, right? So that's a completely different category than what you were talking about. Well, I mean, that's a government's decision, right? They should go. First of all, they should never qualified for them because they weren't in the private sector, and they shouldn't have gotten the loan to begin with. They're not a small business on the SBA.
But what I'm saying, Dan, is they got it forgiven, and you're saying it's the government's fault.
Well, but they took it under fraudulent.
You're not saying that. You're saying they should pay it back. That's where I'm saying that there's a discrepancy between the outrage for the PPP loan forgiveness and not
apples and oranges, Jacoby. It's apples and oranges. Not really. It's not the same thing.
It's still money.
It's a lot more.
And then on top of that, to add in the fact, this is an example of why a lot of individuals are really upset how those at the upper echelon get treated, because the upper echelon received more of the PPP loans, and then a lot of the tax breaks, and then companies also aren't paying those taxes because they're considered people by Mitt Romney, and you have all these issues, and that's an example of that division that people are agitated about, because they're saying that the government and these high individuals who have this money get seen differently than the average individual. And so that's a separation between the two parties, and that's another whole discussion. But Nick,
well, like I say, I think it's apples and oranges. You can.
Well, let's get quick the apples and oranges. Hey, Nick, just really quickly. Nick, really quickly, I had a question for you. It actually was something that Kim raised earlier. It's actually on our chatter page, which is in that beta stage, and we're glad to be getting and rolling that out shortly, but soon, and all in that space. But one of the questions that she asked, and I responded back to her, was there was a Supreme Court decision that employees, if they wanted to, could strike back at those that are going on strike if there is damage and everything. So there was, I think, a decision that was the majority that they could sue the workers or the employees if there was damage and everything. And the question I asked on the chatter was a lot of different questions, but part of it was, historically speaking, there used to be union busters that would go in and do a lot of the damage themselves. They were not necessarily the folks that were the employees. So would this be a possible return to that kind of thing? Because if I'm an employee and you're just going on strike and everything, then I don't see why I would, as a corporation, go in there and hire people to be kind of the disruptors, and we've seen that in all kinds of protests, and do the damage and then turn around and sue the workers and be like, look, my glasses were broken, I lost all this money and everything. It's your fault because you went on strike and everything, when it could have been some outside agitators. We know that happened way back in the 30s and the 40s and even other parts of history as well. So that's what my issue was with the bill. But I was just wondering y'all's thoughts about that, because it seems like it opens up all kinds of disaster possibilities.
Well, I mean, look, these are workers that left cement in the damn trucks. How stupid is that? They knew that would create damage. They should have been more responsible than that. So this isn't really an egregious situation.
Right.
I think it's an exception more than a rule. So I don't imagine this decision will impact unions all that much.
Out of curiosity, because I know Steve wanted to jump in real quick, and I was curious because he's in a position that's dealing with the laws and stuff. So Steve.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I'm sorry, I'm only here for a few minutes today. Are we talking about? Well, what I wanted to do real quickly is what I was going to talk about today, and I'm not going to have time, so we're going to talk about Monday. Is obviously the debt deal, and I'm going to answer your question on that. Just an announcement: we have 339,000 new jobs, and Donald Trump's again under investigation for his involvement in the Georgia elections. And I was going to share some insight at the end about before I leave today, but we're going to talk on Monday about the presidential elections and how it's shaping up. And what if Joe Biden were to not run, and let's say he changes his mind last minute? Where does that leave the Democrats? We're doing some research on that. It's kind of interesting in terms of who could run for president and why people aren't contesting him in a primary. But anyway, your question was about the debt ceiling deal, right?
That was one of the earlier questions, and then we were talking about the strike and the nature that employers can go after employees for damages caused by strikes. And I hear what Dan was saying, that was a one-time case, and it was a case that was very negative in that sense and everything. But my point is, can they use that one incident and turn it against some more active protests that are more not as radical as that particular one?
Yeah,
I think it was just egregious, right? Just egregious.
But Jatovi's question, though.
Oh, I wanted to hear your views on both the debt ceiling and the question that Mark just added or asked about how the change from the employer suing the employee dealing with strikes, and they're utilizing their voice.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll take a question on the debt ceiling and what my thoughts are. I think that despite how dismal we look at the debt and its economic ramifications, the fact of the matter is we often, if you look at the United States of America today, we are 4% of the world's population, but we're still growing at 25% GDP. So as long as we're in an economic situation where we can continue to have growth in America with job creation, low unemployment, we're going to continue to incur debt. So no surprise that they struck a deal, and hopefully the president will sign it. But I think this will continue to happen every year. But I think in many ways it shows you that I'm still very optimistic about the future of the U.S. economy. I think that we're still, and we're going to be talking about India next week as Prime Minister Modi will be visiting. We've got some guests to come and talk about his visit to the U.S. But I feel like, it's maybe I'm wrong, and maybe if you incur this kind of debt, eventually it will have ramifications in terms of cutting spending in certain areas, not investing where we need to invest. But as long as we can get away with it, I think the U.S. is going to keep doing it. I hope that answers your question, Jatovi. And in terms of my analysis on employers and employees, I mean, I feel like employees have the right to unionize and go on strike. And I just don't know what the litmus test would be for, employers coming in and suing for damages and those kinds of things. You get into kind of like violating workers' rights. And I think there's certain industries where if people went on strike, it could be very damaging. I lived in West Virginia, and when I was a kid, the teachers went on strike for 3 years. And literally I had one teacher for most of my elementary school education because there were no teachers to teach. So
Steve, were those legal strikes? Certain industries, they're not allowed to strike. Am I wrong? Didn't Reagan have that issue with the Air Force controllers?
Yeah, he resolved that issue, I think, right?
He just fired them all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
basically.
I don't know. We have Sacha Star with us. I'm going to leave. I'm going to let him update us on Russia before I take off in 5 minutes. But the final thing I'll say when we talk on Monday, what I was going to talk about was I'm going to open up on, it is Pride Month. I'm going to talk about the history of Pride Month and the Stonewall riots of 1970 and kind of what it is about today. And then we're also going to talk about kind of like if Joe Biden were not to run, who would be going in there? Would it be Kamala? Would it be, Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan? I've heard the names of John Del Rey, I think, from Louisiana, Jack Shapiro from, I think, Pennsylvania, or Wes Moore.
Kennedy's already in there.
Robert Kennedy. But the fact of the matter is, and Mark, you can update us on Monday about Bernie Sanders because I have to leave. But the fact of the matter is, most Democrats or any president, when he's run with an incumbent is primaried, they don't do well in the election. So this happened with Lyndon Johnson, George H.W. Bush. Johnson decided not to run, and I can't remember who ran against him, and of course Jimmy Carter. So I think the Democrats have decided, is it better to rally behind Biden, who would probably be the only one who could defeat Trump, or take a risk on someone else who probably would lose, and then you would have Trump in the White House again. Now, I think what's going to be interesting is if DeSantis does run, the other thing we never talked about, which I think is something interesting for us to talk about, is that the last presidential election was one in which it required really no campaigning. It was a lockdown campaign, mostly Zoom, mostly virtual events, masked up, small gatherings. This is going to be a presidential campaign where we're back out in person. So is the energy level going to be there for Joe Biden to canvass and travel to all 50 states? I think Trump has more energy than Biden, even though he's a few years younger. Or would DeSantis, would that be a game changer if he had, let's say he were to pull off the nomination, having a 44-year-old run against an 82-year-old, will that make a difference? So,
Steve, Steve, why do you assume that the absentee balloting, not in-person, is going to be reduced this next election?
It's not.
They didn't take away those laws.
There's going to be a lot more in-person campaigning, lots of rallies, lots of, Biden at 82 is going to have to travel to all 50 states.
Do you see Biden actually doing in-person campaigning?
Yeah, he's
I
going
don't
to have
see it.
He's going to have to if he wants to get reelected.
He doesn't have to do anything. He can stay in his basement. There's a lot of anti-Trump sentiment out there also. People do not want Trump elected.
No, he still has to campaign and get out in front of people. I mean, it's still a see and touch.
Would you not vote for him because he doesn't?
It's not me personally as a
Do you
general.
think I get that. Do you think anyone who's going to vote for him would not just because he doesn't campaign?
Yes.
Not so much him, but I think that you have to reach the independents, and the independents, you have to reach them by actually going to talk to those independents. I think that, as we've said on this show several times, those that are diehard Trump folks are going to vote for Trump no matter what and everything. And I would say the same for the Democratic side. But
That's my point, Mark.
but the key vote in everything is the independents, and you have to reach the independents.
So why aren't they doing debates then for the independents to hear what's going on?
Trump
Before
is losing in the polls. Hello?
Before I
Democrats.
do that, let's
DeSantis
get Sasha
I don't
to
think
pick
he
up
is. I think he's
in the
ahead.
polls.
I've
Hello.
got to head out, guys. Sasha,
panel.
I hear you, Nick.
Earth
I'd
to
like to mention
panel.
So
something.
which poll are you
DeSantis
talking about, Nick?
in the
Go
polls.
ahead.
Steve was trying to tell everybody bye.
Mike,
no, I got
Steve, have a good weekend.
Sasha, if you could give them a quick update on Russia. I'm going to be leaving, but and then I'll be back on Monday. I want to thank you all for being with us on World Edition. I'm en route today, but such an honor to host this great show. I want to thank my outstanding team, and been a little bit of a busy time as we've gotten out of the pandemic with me doing. And today I'll be on WPTF at 3:00 for my live 1 hour on the state's largest radio station. So that's exciting that I've joined the team there as a commentator. So we're talking about national issues and things like that. But Sasha, if you can give them an update on Russia, and then I'm looking forward, Sasha, to coming on the show maybe in a week or two. But thank you all so
He'll have an
much.
episode at 11 o'clock as well.
Thanks to
See
Russia.
you, yeah.
Simple.
See you Monday morning, guys. Thank you.
Take care, Steve. Have a good weekend.
Go ahead, Sasha.
In Moscow, several options were discussed, and the only option to continue the war is to hope that Trump will become the next president of the United States. That's a very serious option, and it's worth to continue the war until such option is alive. Trump is obviously a Russian asset for the last 40 years or so, and Trump will help somehow maybe to first of all stop American help to Ukraine, and based on that offer some peace terms which would be more or less acceptable. So that's only hope. So if Trump, as soon as he will be taken out of nomination, Russia will be ready for serious peace negotiations. Failing that, they will continue the war as maybe even escalated, and that's the only hope for them to have Trump to be elected next president. Now, speaking about the rallies, what you just a couple of minutes ago discussed. By the way, Trump now gets away from the big rallies what he had during the last several years, and he's now opting for some intimate situations because he cannot get as many people as rally on rallies, so it would be televised, it would have a big impact and do something. He can't. Actually, he's been booed on his rallies quite a few times. So now he wants to get some small, intimate gathering. So he's losing his Trump card, where he had a big advantage over other candidates, perhaps Joe Biden, and so on. As a result of the election, I think Democrats should wait until Trump will take his candidacy out. And once it's done, then they have to take Biden out and look for somebody to really run, because Biden will not be able to defeat neither DeSantis or any other Republican candidates. He can defeat only one man in this world. It's Donald J. Trump. He'll beat him easily, but I don't think Trump will even make it close. I think his candidacy is very shaky, and maybe he will take himself out in the next few weeks.
Hey, Sasha, really quickly, I know that your show is called Ukraine, Russia, and China, so I was actually going to get to the Chinese part and everything, because definitely it looks like the United States and China are vowing to expand their influence on the Asia Pacific nations and everything. And definitely there's a conference going on there in Singapore, a security forum. And apparently the Australian Prime Minister, I wish that Shaquille was here, Anthony Albanese, is going to be talking, because he is a stalwart American ally in the Pacific, and he's going to open up the dialogue at that particular event. But he's already angered Beijing because of his agreement with Britain and the U.S., known as AUKUS, AUKUS, to obtain nuclear-powered submarines to address the perceived rising threat from China. So they are feeling that even down there in Australia, there is a rising threat from China. We know about Chinese and their involvement with Taiwan and everything. So I was wondering, to you and to the panel, is this a part of the concern that we need to be thinking about as well? And there's also been talks about how much China is influencing that war between Ukraine and Russia.
The White House appointed a new chief of staff instead of General Milley. There's a new chief of staff. He's, by the way, he's a black man, Afro-American. He has absolutely fantastic biography, work experience, and this is part of the rotation. Like every 4 years, they have to renew and put a new person and stuff. So this is a very positive development, and I think China is. I think it's affected by failure of Russia to get anything going on with Ukraine, except killing thousands and thousands of innocent people. And China is sort of very quiet, and it stopped its noises about invading Taiwan and so on. But even if it's not slowing down, United States military will slow it down quite kind of a big time. So China, I think, they're playing now a game to, like in stock market, the most important thing is the preservation of capital. It's not how much money you're going to make, but how much money you can sustain and you can preserve. So this is number one. So I think China is trying to preserve its position in the world. I don't think they are really trying to expand or to be aggressive. It's not the time. It's not the place.
Hey, Lee and Nick and the rest of the panel, even Jacoby, do you agree with that philosophy? Because definitely the gentleman he's talking about is Lloyd Austin, and he's going to be speaking on Saturday, and he's going to be talking about leadership in the Indo-Pacific area and talking about the U.S. leadership in there as well as the Western leadership. But are you comfortable with our stance on China and everything? I mean, Lee, you're a future presidential, actually a present presidential candidate. So what is your thoughts? Are you comfortable in that regards in the way that we are handling China?
It is specifically in terms of what with China, because there's so much going on over there.
In terms of their presence in the world stage, the world politics and everything, because they definitely are.
China does not have our best interest, obviously. China has China. To them, it's totally about them. It's not about the world, and it's not about the United States. And they have a totally different culture and mindset. Especially, I'm talking about the leadership, not the people. I'm going to make that distinction. Their leadership has a goal, and I do believe it's world domination, and we're playing right into it.
Yep, that's right.
I don't know if it's world domination more so than, they want to be in the power play just as we're in the power play right now. I mean, you can say the same thing.
It's a difference, Jacoby.
Yeah, but see, we have a history of going into a conflict, winning, and then pulling out.
Dan, it's not so clear. And this is why I agree with Jacoby. We do have blood on our hands.
Well, we do, but I mean, we didn't go in Iraq and take their oil, for example. We didn't go. I mean, when we go in and we leave the people free in their own democracies, right? That our hands are not necessarily clean.
Haven't we propped up some dictatorships because we felt that they had some strategic connection to us? I can think of things in Latin America. I can think of things in Asia. I can think of a number of places that we have.
Oh, that's the CIA.
Let's be completely honest here. Every powerful nation, every rich nation, if they see a country that has a resource or mineral that country wants, and it is a rich country, they will go in that country. It's not about the other people. We are money driven just like every other country is money driven. So, for example, in Iraq, we created a vacuum. And yes, we wanted that resource. We wanted access to that resource. because oil is a big, valuable resource. We wanted access to that. So we created that vacuum. Matter of fact, if you look at what Trump did in 2016, when his big campaign, what was it, 2016, or it could have been in his running for 2020, when he was talking about in his campaign rally, I would go in and take the oil. That was his exact words, is that I will go in and take the oil. So
That's okay.
But
No, it's not, Dan.
Dan, it's completely opposite than what you just literally said.
No, we spent
Well,
billions
again.
and billions of dollars in Iraq.
So
and
thing, so just to be honest, just as Lee said, we do have blood on our hands, and we have to be honest about that.
well, I mean, I do understand that.
So
Having served in the military, you know what I mean.
in truth, yes, China is for China just as the U.S. is for the U.S. And that is what every country does. And that is what every country is supposed to be about, is they're supposed to be about their people and about making sure that they aren't overrun. And I think it was Sanjay Gupta actually did a great piece talking about China and its relations and the U.S. relations with China, and how in truth and in honesty, we have to be more deliberate and more dedicated to not demonizing China, because they're not going away. We have to be more deliberate and honest about figuring ways to work with, because again, they're not going away. It's like
That's true.
It's
But
like
they're not playing. They're not playing fair. I mean, they're
And again,
proliferating our universities. They're stealing
they're-
our technology. There's no way really to defend against it because of the way our laws work.
Again, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. There are things that we've stolen as well.
From
There
who?
are things that we're leaders in. We are starting to lose our leadership position because we don't invest in the correct things that we should, and we're becoming more of a service nation and not a product nation.
Well, we need to go steal more technology from. Wait a minute, we're the ones that are developing it.
We aren't developing everything as we were before. There are other countries that are developing things. If you look at the lithium batteries and all the other things, because the minerals and the resources are in other countries. So we're not leaders in the wind turbine industry. That's one big industry that we should lead in, but we're not, because of our political system. We're not investing in that wind turbine and solar and so on and so forth. Because what are we fighting for? Oil. Guess who's doing the wind turbine leading? That's China. When we can lead in that industry, we
And Norway.
develop everywhere else, because we're not developing as much as we can. And we have these factories like in Detroit and other places that can be converted into those wind turbine factories, but we don't, because of our political and our policies, because we're yelling about, oh, well, she's got a coin phrase and it's called the Green New Deal. Well,
It's not reliable. Neither
no,
wind
what
or
I'm
solar are
wind
reliable forms of-
energy, it can be reliable. Nuclear can be reliable.
Yes,
We're just
nuclear,
not
yes.
investing in
I
that
agree.
technology.
Well, actually,
as much
no,
as we're
actually,
investing
new
in the other
technologies
in
are
oil.
new technologies are emerging in the United States for smaller nuclear plants that are much safer than the traditional kind. I know I've actually read the research. And in fact, the first small nuclear plant is going up, and so we will see. I think we'll see more of that, Chitovi. I think I agree with you. That is that nuclear has always been an issue because of the risks involved. But I think as the smaller plants are much safer, because they can't melt down and they're not going to create a radioactive problem. I think that's more sustainable over time, and I think. Hydrogen is an answer, electric to some extent, but as long as we have a grid problem, we're not going to be able to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but you know what we're not investing in? We're not updating our grid because of politics.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not updating.
Yeah,
we're not
I agree.
investing in the solar, because solar, we could dominate solar. We have Death Valley, so we could dominate in solar and transfer the power based on our grid by updating.
Yeah,
our
and
grid.
that's the
But we're
irony.
not.
You know,
But
California.
the thing is,
has such a
Dan, just as
problem
we
with,
agree on the grid being updated, stuff like that gets gets demonized because it becomes a bumper sticker in our politics. And that's what is our problem right now, is our politics are holding us back. And so you have other countries that are taking the advantage and taking the lead in these areas. So going back to what Mark's question was, dealing with China, we're going to have to deal with China more, less adversarial and more as a co-op partner, because we have to figure out ways that we have to jump up in that technological game, jump up in the educational game, because again, we're letting things go like the wind turbines, because we don't want to vote for a Green New Deal or even discuss it because it has the term Green New Deal. Yet,
well, the problem with our educational system is the way it's organized. We do not encourage the brilliant children in our culture to actually achieve excellence because of the way we structured our programs. And in fact, it's interesting because they used to have honor sections in math and other things in our high schools, and now they've taken that name away because they don't want other kids to feel bad because they can't be in them. I mean, yes.
Hey, Dan, we're gonna have to discuss this a little bit on Monday.
Yes,
we're winding down and all in that space. Lee, I did have one other very quick question for you and everything, but it's a very quick question. It's actually somewhat of a joking question as well, because
just name that tune.
The nature of the show and everything. So my question for you is, have you fallen down lately? Because I'm thinking that that's a prerequisite for being a president, because we know Trump fell down, Biden apparently recently fell down, and there's been other things that have been going down. So you are running for presidential candidates. So I want to know, one, have you fallen down? And two, have you gone out and gotten a swan? Because I know that there was this whole incident in New York with the swan that was kidnapped and then eaten and everything. So I didn't know if you had gone out and gotten your swan to go into the campaign as well.
And have they all been falling down or falling up? When Trump fell, did he fall up or down the staircase?
I think he fell down as well.
Fell down as well.
And Biden said he was literally sandbagged because he said that he fell over some.
You remember the old Dick Van Dyke show? He would always fall coming into the room, Rob? That character.
Yep. So yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I'm beginning to think it's a prerequisite, because we know Gerald Ford fell. We know there was even incidences of Clinton and Bush and Reagan and a number of others falling. So I'm beginning to think that it's a prerequisite for being a president. So
I think we all fall at one point in our life.
No, you got to fall during the campaign. Isn't that right, Jacoby?
During the campaign, when the cameras are on.
Yeah, when the cameras are on.
It doesn't matter if you fall down. It only matters how you get up.
Exactly.
This is true. As long as you do get up.
Yep, you got to get up. And on that note, we're going to get on out of here. We got the Ukraine-Russia panic show coming up very shortly.